We'll call to order the special meeting of the Grand Forks Public School Board on May 20th. First item on the agenda is a call to order and Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Monty, if you could mute yourself, that would be great. Thank you. First item on the agenda the second item is the recommendations from School Board President Amber Flynn regarding personnel complaint about Superintendent Dr. Terry Brenner. On April 10th, 2024, a personnel complaint regarding the budget realignment process and lack of transparency, lack of communication, lack of collaboration, and lack of respect was delivered to me under policy KACB by Mr. Terry Bohan, President of GFPA, Grand Forks Principals Association, on behalf of GFPA. Pursuant to policy KACB, I investigated the complaint. I began by requesting documents to review. I then scheduled interviews with pertinent administrators and directors. Throughout the investigation, I reviewed numerous internal documents and videos and audio recordings. I was still analyzing and reviewing all pertinent information today and concluded my investigation today. Pursuant to policy KACB, I am making recommendations regarding my investigation to the board for final actions. Before I make the recommendations, I will review the process, go over some findings, and my conclusions. But first, I'd like to state a few ground rules. I retained the services of Laura Cobb as the school board attorney throughout this process. She's present today. If there's any questions, I may ask that she assist in helping me to answer those. There will be no public comment today. The only discussion that will occur will be between board members. The complainant, respondent, or any other party will not be given any chance to speak. Introducing my investigation, the complaint specifically noted 2 joint administrative meetings held on March 21st and March 28th. As I went through the investigation, I maintained the scope of this process. I reviewed relevant board policies, procedures, and law, which are outlined in the investigative report. During my investigation, as stated in the memo, I reviewed and requested multiple pieces of documentation and evidence. The district and/or other provided myself with records and relevant information which are listed in the investigative report. I also included a list of individuals that I interviewed. And I'll now go through some findings. These may not be all inclusive of the findings outlined in the report. I made the following findings of fact. Dr. Terry Brenner was hired by the Grand Forks Public School Board in June of 2018 as the superintendent. The superintendent reports to the Public School Board of the Grand Forks Public School District Number 1. The superintendent's main job is to serve as the chief executive officer of the school district, advising the school board on issues of public elementary and secondary education. The superintendent shall carry out these responsibilities and exercise the powers of the school board delegated to him, her, by the school board as provided in the superintendent job description. The superintendent received the following directives from the school board regarding the budget. Superintendent was tasked by the school board increasing the general fund balance to 15% by June 30th, 2026, as outlined in the guiding change document. Superintendent was not given specific directions on how to achieve the 15% goal, and this was left up to the superintendent's discretion, as the superintendent is responsible for all aspects of school operation and may delegate responsibility and authority as necessary, as outlined in his job description. In policy BFA. Beginning in May of 2003 through June of 2003, Brandon Bombach, business manager, began to discuss meeting the stated goal of increasing the general fund balance to 15% with the executive cabinet and administrative cabinet. The executive cabinet is made up of Superintendent Dr. Terry Brenner, Associate Superintendent of Secondary Education Catherine Galach, Assistant Superintendent of Elementary Education Matt Bakke, Brandon Bombach, business manager, and Griffin Gillespie, Director of Human Resources. The administrative cabinet is all of the individuals in the executive cabinet, with the addition of Director of Career and Technical Education Eric Ripley, Chief Academic Officer Amy Barch, Director of Buildings and Grounds Jonathan Elwine, Executive Director of Special Education Dr. Alyssa Diedrich, and Activities Director Mike Biermeyer. In the fall of 2023, the Administrative Cabinet began to decide the framework of how to reach the 15% general fund balance goal. At this time, Mr. Bombach prepared thorough spreadsheets that detailed every district's building expenses. The spreadsheets were presented to each principal about their specific building and the Mark Sanford Education Center. Activities were also included in this exercise. The activities under Activities Director. The superintendent, Dr. Brenner, with support from the administrative cabinet and principals, gave clear directives for all administrators to follow, including each building or department outlined needed to cut 5% of that building department's budget for the upcoming school year 2024-2025. There were going to be no non-renewal by reduction in force for any certified staff members, and certified staff members may be reassigned to other areas in which they were certified. The administrators were to try and stay as far away from the classroom experience as possible. The administrators were to try to provide other job opportunities to classified staff members that may lose their current classified position for the upcoming school year 2024-2025. Each administrator needed to look at their own building or department efficiency, and this was stated as looking at your own backyard first. Lastly, administrators were not to visit with teachers or other staff to get their input, which was unitedly supported. The administrative cabinet began to schedule additional meetings dedicated solely to the budget realignment process. The meetings were scheduled for the second Monday of each month at 4:15 p.m. The thought was these budget meetings would be prior to the regularly scheduled school board meetings. Dr. Brenner, sometimes without notice, was absent from several of these meetings. The meetings were moved from the second Monday to the month to Wednesday instead. The administrative cabinet had to stop work at times due to Dr. Brenner's absence, but Mr. Bombach met with Dr. Brenner and gave him general updates about the budget meetings if Dr. Brenner missed a meeting. It was stated and was very clear at the beginning and throughout the process to all principals, directors, and administrators that Dr. Brenner had final say in any recommendation put forth by the principals, directors, and other administrators, and that the superintendent could override or choose not to consider any input or recommendation given by the principals, directors, and administrators. It was effectively communicated that Dr. Brenner was the final decision maker. A color-coded system known as the stoplight document or budget efficiency worksheet was used throughout this process. Green coded reductions that were most aligned with the district's articulated goals, objectives, and collective commitments, and were practical and allowed more efficiency without significant anticipated repercussions. Yellow were those that had merit and align well with the district's articulated goals, objectives, and collective commitments, may have some challenges but were manageable. Orange coded those that created significant challenges as they pertain to the district's articulated goals, objectives, and collective commitments, and implementation would be challenging yet doable and require careful planning and consideration. Red coded reductions were those that would pose significant obstacles as they pertain to the district's articulated goals, objectives, and collective commitments and would require substantial programmatic overhaul, which would create significant programming loss or deficit. The district's strategic plan and mission were reviewed as part of the district's articulated goals and commitments. Through evaluating all possible reductions, it was natural for principals, directors, and administrators to informally compare district programming to that of other schools across the district. However, it was never a stated directive by the administration or Dr. Brenner to compare programming in other districts. On January 16th, 2024, the Administrative Cabinet took their Budget Efficiencies Worksheet, reviewed, analyzed, discussed, and ultimately gave their own color codes to provide each concept from each level. Additionally, I forgot to mention that Twining was separate as a level on its own. In early February 2024, each building and department presented at a joint administrative meeting to the rest of the joint administrative group. The group was instructed to evaluate other level concepts and provide feedback on the proposals for reductions. A tool to help the administrative group evaluate other department concepts was a blind survey. The survey results were collected by the Administrative Cabinet and sent out to the joint administrative group later. Through the budget realignment process, Dr. Brenner had stated that he had been engaging school board support for the proposed reductions, and Dr. Brenner communicated to the joint administration that the budget goal of 15%, how the budget goal would be attained, and it was not a board decision, but an administrative decision. Throughout the budget realignment process, it was understood by all administrators, directors, and principals that the budget realignment process and discussions were hard. Due to the sensitive nature of realigning staff members, jobs, and dealing with big decisions where people's work would be impacted. It was acknowledged by all, including Dr. Brenner, and communicating to the principals that the members of public would likely speak out against proposed realignments, but that the administration had to progress forward with realignments despite public disagreement. At times throughout the process, the principals, both elementary and secondary, communicated to their direct supervisors, Mr. Bakke and Ms. Galach, that they had concerns about whether final reductions would be carried forward or not. These concerns mainly stemmed from past budget exercises in 2021 and the non-renewal reduction in force hearings that were reversed and were specifically mentioned by many principals that were interviewed. Throughout the realignment process, some principals asked if the 15% general fund goal had to be completed by 2026 or if the goal could be met through attrition and a reassignment with a longer timeline. Dr. Brenner stated in response, not at this time, and these concerns regarding meeting the 2026 deadline were not communicated to the school board. The worksheets provided to all administrative cabinet members, including Dr. Brenner, had expressed rationale for proposed cuts and also repercussion for the cuts, in addition to the color coding tool. The final presentation of the proposed 2024-2025 budget realignments was pushed back. The principals, particularly high school principals, urged the final decision surrounding the budget realignment process to be finalized due to the need to make the master schedule for the upcoming year, as this was later than it usually is completed. The principals, administrators, directors all agreed the budget realignment process from fall of 2023 through February 22nd, 2024 was collaborative, thorough, respectful, and transparent, and it was agreed it was a better process than previous processes in 2021. I then go on to list some proposals by principals that were outlined specifically. On February 22nd, 2024, a joint administrator meeting was held. At this meeting, Dr. Brenner asked those principals, directors, and administrators to meet with staff in their buildings and departments that would be affected by the budget realignment. The Joint Administrator Group was told to meet with the affected staff members prior to the district-wide Zoom meeting that would occur at 3:45 p.m. that same day. The district discussed how to deliver the message and felt it was best to give those affected by the budget realignment the news prior to the meeting. The final list presented at that meeting was not questioned by any principal at the February 22nd, 2024 meeting. The principals did not provide feedback on the final list of budget realignments as of February 22, 2024. On February 22, 2024, at 3:45 p.m., Dr. Brenner hosted a district-wide Zoom meeting from his office at MSEC. It was approximately 21 minutes and 39 seconds. He communicated the following: the goal of 15% balance by June 2026, historical data on the district's budget, Grand Forks Public Schools ending fund balance as of 2022 compared to other school districts, sharing that 81% of the district's budget in salaries and benefits for staff and showing the district funds, the different district funds, prioritizing student achievement as a district goal, description of a comprehensive process involving executive cabinet, administrative cabinet, directors, principals, board leadership, a general chart of elementary, middle, high school, MSEC activities and Twining's 5% goals, a statement that every position was discussed for budget realignment. The school board is not the decision maker for the budget realignment process, a statement that not all principals, directors, and administrators agree on the budget realignment process, realignment decision, and not all staff will agree either. A message to impacted groups that they could reach out to Dr. Brenner, Ms. Galach, Mr. Bakke, and meet with them. The specifics of the budget realignment were not discussed. Due to specific information not being communicated, many staff members were puzzled and confused, which created anxiety and strain between many principals and their staff members. Many principals stayed after the conclusion of the Zoom meeting to answer questions from staff members. February 26, 2024, the Grand Forks Public School District held a meeting and, among other things, updated the school board on the budget realignment process. Dr. Brenner read a statement. Mr. Bombach presented information regarding the realignment proposed budget. 84 students, staff, and members of the public spoke at the public comment portion of the agenda. All of these comments were opposing the budget realignment as proposed, specifically with regard to music, phasing out German, and the reductions to classified staff at the libraries. At this time, Amber Flynn, board president, stated the public comment portion that it was not a back and forth dialogue, and Dr. Brenner could correct any information if he wanted to. Dr. Brenner did not make any corrections to misinformation that was shared by the public during the public comment portion. He did not believe that it would be best to engage in debate correcting students. After the meeting, Dr. Brenner and other administrators and school board members received hundreds of emails regarding the proposed budget realignment. Most of the emails were opposed to the realignment in music at the middle and high school level, phasing out of German, and reduction of classified staff at the libraries. Dr. Brenner, Ms. Galach, and Mr. Bakke began having meetings with staff members in music, the sale department, German, library, secondary music, and library again. Jeff Seablum only met with Dr. Brenner alone on two occasions. Jeff Seablum met with Dr. Brenner on one occasion. At the above meetings, they listened. They did not invite principals to these meetings, nor did they notify principals that these meetings were taking place. Dr. Brenner stated his offer at the Zoom meeting was to meet directly with impacted staff members and Ms. Galach and Mr. Bakke himself. He did not include the principals, nor did they ever ask to attend the meetings. The principals were generally aware that this would happen. However, they were not aware of specific dates and times the meetings were taking place. Nor did Mr. Bakke or Ms. Galach invite principals. The principals would have liked to be included in the meetings to counter any contentions from the impacted staff members. Dr. Brenner also did not know the principals wanted to be included. After the February 26 board meeting, the Joint Administrator Group never met to discuss the budget realignment process. At the individual levels, there was never any communication from the Administrative Cabinet with regard to the budget realignment process with specifics outlined. Dr. Brenner did not consult the principals regarding the budget realignment process at all after the February 26 school board meeting. Dr. Brenner contacted superintendents of Fargo, West Fargo, Bismarck, and Minot with regards to foreign languages and how they are offered, and music if they had one-on-one lessons. And they shared information with him. Dr. Brenner took the message or the information he learned with community input, the additional superintendents and staff member concerns, and started making executive decisions about the budget realignment process. Dr. Brenner felt the need to make decisions as a timeline was looming. The timeline was in regards to a master schedule and notification of hiring processes. Dr. Brenner believed through conversations with Ms. Galach that she stated it would not be an anomaly to have less than 3 foreign languages compared to other districts, and that she had stated other districts did not offer music lessons. In contrast, Ms. Galach denies these statements and referenced the rationale in the budget efficiencies worksheets. Ms. Galach does not recall visiting about this topic with school board member Monty Gockler, but does recall visiting with the topic about this topic with school board member Monty Gockler, but does not remember making those exact statements. On March 21st, 2024, a joint administrative meeting was held. At this meeting, Dr. Brenner announced the district was no longer reducing 2 FTEs at the high school level, not reducing a 6/5 contract at the elementary and middle school, and 3 FTEs at the middle school level and 1 foreign language at the high school level. Dr. Brenner presented his alternative reductions in the budget realignment process. At the March 21st meeting, Dr. Brenner said, "I'm calling an audible," quote. He also stated that he was working with or given bad information previously. Dr. Brenner also stated the silent majority did not speak up, and those who opposed the reductions did. Those interviewed all described the principals as shocked and angry. One principal did speak up and asked if the principals had a say in the decisions, and Dr. Brenner said no. There was no further discussion about the reasons why Dr. Brenner reversed music FTEs and foreign language FTEs, and from the principal's perspective, this was frustrating. Dr. Brenner never stated directly what bad information he was working with and did not directly state where the bad information came from. However, everyone in the room knew that Dr. Brenner was referring to information from Ms. Galach regarding high school and middle school music and foreign language recommendation. Many principals stated that Dr. Brenner was indirectly placing blame on this specific topic. On March 28th, a joint administrative meeting was held. Dr. Brenner again presented the reversal of the music and foreign language reductions. Dr. Brenner also reversed 0.7 FTE in library paras at the high schools, 0.9 FTE media para positions. Again, the principals were shocked at the reversal of decisions. There was little pushback from the principals at this meeting. There was no yelling, arguing, or profanity by either group in these meetings. Dr. Brenner and the rest of the group's conduct was professional and respectful. Since final decisions were made and released to the school staff on February 22nd and the board on February 26th, the principals trusted Dr. Brenner to carry forward those decisions. When Dr. Brenner reversed the decisions, the principals lost trust in Dr. Brenner's leadership, since the principals were the ones that formulated the realignment proposals through a thorough, collaborative, and formal process. Due to Dr. Brenner not stating the principals did not have a voice, due to Dr. Brenner not consulting the principals about his decision to reverse these reductions and stating the principals did not have a voice in the matter, the principals received the reversal as a lack of transparency and lack of collaboration by Dr. Brenner. GFPA considered Dr. Brenner's meetings with impacted staff a lack of transparency, since the principals were not invited to those meetings and were unaware of the dates and times they were held. Additionally, they were not consulted after those meetings and were not given a chance to discuss with Dr. Brenner why their recommendation should be honored. On March 27th, the Grand Forks Principal Association held a meeting to discuss their concerns about Dr. Brenner's leadership, particularly his reversal of the budget realignment process. The following was mentioned and discussed. Filing a complaint under policy KACB. Writing a letter to Dr. Brenner and the school board president was mentioned. Going directly to Dr. Brenner was mentioned. No formal action was taken at this meeting. After the joint administrator meeting, GFPA met again and decided to write a complaint under policy KACB regarding Dr. Brenner's conduct through the realignment process, specifically in relation to the March 21st and March 28th meeting and the realignment process. There is general consensus to move forward with a complaint and sign off as an organization, not with individual names. The executive board of GFPA began drafting a letter of complaint on April 5th. On April 9th, GFPA decided to move forward with a personnel complaint. GFPA did not bring their concerns to the Human Resources Director prior to filing the complaint. GFPA also did not bring their concerns to Dr. Brenner prior to filing the complaint. Many of the principals stated they feared retaliation from Dr. Brenner if they disagreed with his decisions or brought up concerns. Principals were unable to give direct examples of retaliation for disagreeing with Dr. Brenner during this process. There were, however, specific examples that were given by some principals regarding Dr. Brenner making decisions without consulting the principals, and in some cases, staff members bypassing the hierarchy promoted by policy. The incidents that were discussed all took place beyond 180 days ago and are not recent and do not meet the definition of retaliation. Therefore, they were not discussed with Dr. Brenner during his interview. Two principals stated they could disagree with Dr. Brenner and felt comfortable doing so, at least in one-on-one settings. Additionally, to provide context, on February 26, 2021, the elementary principals wrote a letter to the executive cabinet expressing their concerns with the budget reductions during that time. The elementary principals never received any response from that letter from the executive cabinet. Dr. Brenner did not recall receiving the letter. Ms. Galach stated the letter rang a bell, but doesn't know what was done. Dr. Brenner and Ms. Galach were the only members of the current executive cabinet at that time that are currently still in the district. Based upon the above findings I just read, I am making the following conclusions. Relevant policy and law, Policy DE of the Grand Forks School Board Policies, Policy CAAABR, and North Dakota Century Code 15.1-14-04 and 15.1-14-01 were reviewed in my decision. All of the superintendent's directives of the findings were reasonable approaches to the budget process and within the superintendent's authority. The rationale to not engage teachers or other staff was to provide a harmonious culture and not to pit staff members against each other. This was a reasonable rationale for not including staff members beyond the level of principals in the budget realignment process. There was no school board directive to honor or consult the principals in formulating the budget or reaching the 15% balance in the general fund by June of 2026. Policy CAAABR does not provide the superintendent must consult or honor input from principals as it relates to the budget and states to organize the business affairs of the school system and make annual budget recommendations. Dr. Brenner was the final decision maker regarding the budget realignment proposals, and all of the principals and administrators were aware and understood that Dr. Brenner could override or veto any and all of their input and recommendations. There was collaboration, transparency, respectfulness, and communication between Dr. Brenner and the administrators and the principals from the fall of 2023 through February 22nd, 2024. There was no communication between Dr. Brenner and the principals directly between February 26th and March 21st. Dr. Brenner never consulted the principals, and the principals never reached out to Dr. Brenner. Therefore, there was a deterioration in communication between Dr. Brenner and the principals as it pertained to the budget realignment as it pertained to the budget realignment process during this period. This also demonstrated a lack of transparency. There's a typo in number 5, so just for board members' sake, this should say lack of transparency, and I'll correct that and I'll resend it to the complainant and respondent. The 2021 budget realignment process compounded the principal's frustration when the recommendations were not honored by Dr. Brenner. Dr. Brenner's meeting with impacted groups alienated the principals from their staff members. The principals were unable to communicate to Dr. Brenner their reasons for the reductions after he met with impacted groups. Further, the principals were tasked by Dr. Brenner with meeting with impacted groups prior to February 22nd Zoom meeting and delivering the bad news. Dr. Brenner then delivered the good news of reversing the reductions to music and foreign languages. The principals were aware Dr. Brenner would be meeting with impacted groups and did not inquire about attending the meetings. The alienation that occurred between the principals and their staff members, which was perceived as a lack of respect by the principals, was an unintended consequences of these meetings with Dr. Brenner. Dr. Brenner never intended to be disrespectful, but rather felt pressure to meet a timeline. And even Ms. Galach acknowledged that it was not a thought to invite principals to these meetings because the statement was that impacted groups would meet with Dr. Brenner, Ms. Galach, and Mr. Bakke. Dr. Brenner used his executive power and authority to reverse budget realignment proposals, which he had the authority to do so. He did so without further input from the principals. One of Dr. Brenner's stated reasons for the reversals was that he was working on bad information, in which ultimately all information came from the principals. This demonstrated poor leadership since Dr. Brenner indirectly blamed other administrators. Dr. Brenner truly believed he had bad information and was not dishonest about his reason for reversing the reductions as proposed by the principals. However, Dr. Brenner had access to the budget efficiency worksheet that contained repercussions from reducing foreign language to only 2 foreign languages, and this was not comparable to similar school districts. Additionally, regarding music at the secondary level, the principals considered the master schedule and comparable staff time in their rationale for their recommendations. Therefore, since Dr. Brenner did not seek additional input from the principals prior to reversing the reductions, he did not know that this information was already provided in their ongoing discussions regarding their initial recommendations. All of this led to a breakdown in the relationship between Dr. Brenner and the principal. This demonstrated a lack of collaboration and communication. GFPA did not seek to resolve these issues in their complaint with Dr. Brenner directly or with the Human Resource Director. The complaint would have been more proper to handle informally prior to filing with the school board president. Generally, the allegations in the complaint regarding lack of communication, lack of collaboration, and lack of transparency through the budget realignment process did occur. However, none of these violate any policy or relevant law. There were no instances of disrespectful conduct or dishonest conduct from Dr. Brenner. Many administrators, directors, and principals that were interviewed acknowledged they all felt uncomfortable bringing concerns to Dr. Brenner or to disagree with him, and further demonstrated a breakdown in their relationship. To that end, there were no found instances of retaliation through the budget realignment process. Pursuant to policy KACB, I am to make recommendations regarding my investigation to the board for final action. General allegations in the complaint were confirmed. However, no confirmed conduct violation violated relevant policy or law. But I do believe that there's a breakdown of a relationship between Dr. Brenner and GFPA. Below are my recommendations regarding the investigation. No disciplinary action is warranted against Dr. Brenner. The superintendent shall have a 360-degree evaluation from this point forward. The district hire a leadership coach chosen by the school board president to come and provide feedback into Dr. Brenner's leadership style and assist in cultivating and rebuilding good relationships with administrators in the district. Also, this coach will help Dr. Brenner and the principals communicate effectively to foster a positive relationship. If a leadership coach is hired, the leadership coach should provide an update and check in to the school board president on progress made between the parties. Bi-weekly standing meetings commencing in July 2024 between the superintendent and GFPA to learn, cultivate, and understand the needs of each school and foster the relationship between the parties, and for the superintendent to know and comprehensively understand the operations of each school. Frequency of the meeting shall be reevaluated in May of 2025. Require the superintendent to visit each school of the district at least 2 times a year to further build relationships and encourage open communication between GFPA and the superintendent, as well as improve the superintendent's knowledge of the district's needs. Lastly, written instructions to all parties that there is absolutely no retaliation by any district employee, including the complainant and respondent, with regards to any employee, investigator, or legal counsel's participation, recommendations, and statements made in the investigation of this complaint. My recommendation for board action is to approve the above recommendations as a result of the investigation into the April 10th, 2024 complaint about Dr. Brenner. There should be no discussion from the complainant or respondent, and only discussion from the school board. Does anyone have any questions or comments at this time? Go ahead.
Clarifying question. Recommendation number 2. Could you define in a bit more detail 360-degree evaluation?
In general terms, the 360-degree evaluation would include individuals that Dr. Brenner supervises, himself and the board, as well as, I'd probably consult with the Human Resources Director to look at different examples of what he's done, but generally it's the supervisees as well as the individual and that individual supervisor.
When I read through this late this afternoon of the investigative report, pages 1 through 19 are clearly very, very thorough, very time-consuming investigation. So I appreciate you doing that. I have a couple of minor disagreements on pages 1 through 19, just because I was in some of the meetings and I remember them a little differently, but they're minor and really aren't worth bringing it up. So I think that all is fine. I have a couple questions about the recommendations. And you realize I sit in senior citizen corner with Bill and I don't know why, if they did that on purpose, but both of us have gone through a lot of things through a lot of years, and most of the time it revolves around communication issues. It ends up, in my experience, when things happen, it's communication issues more than anything else. I'm wondering, are there any other district employees that have 360-degree evaluations currently?
To my knowledge, no.
And so my follow-up would be, and I mainly bring this up because I know in the medical realm, those kinds of evaluations are going by the wayside. They're felt not to be as effective. Why would we do it just for the superintendent? Would we do it for other leadership in the district? Would be my question about that. And I have another question. I'll let you answer that.
My thought to that was, at any time, the Superintendent Evaluation Committee could decide a different process, but I think for the first year, given this, it would be appropriate, and then we could discuss if this is an appropriate method we wanted to trickle down in our district or not.
I just bring it up because I know we've discussed it at Superintendent Evaluation Committee for several years, so thank you for that. The other one is just on number 3, the leadership coach, and I just wonder, because I had leadership coaches when I was the president at All True. Why the decision of having the school board president pick it? Why not have a mutual decision with Dr. Brenner and others as to making sure that it's a coach they could all work with, and just the thought process on that?
I think because I gave the recommendations, it was just put in there as, I might do the job to kind of do some vetting and things like that. But I think it would be a fair process to have say by all parties. The Principals Association has 28 members, so, do you take a unanimous vote or, what? So I think maybe there's some oversight there for the process, but, I'd like to see agreements on, we're okay with this. And in fact, I put that in there specifically because I don't see a leadership coach as punitive necessarily. And in fact, a lot of organizations, and businesses are now including leadership coaching in contracts. And so I thought that would just be a good time to include that. And that would also be included for the principal's benefit.
And I thought the other recommendations look good. I suspect number 5 already occurs, but having it written down is probably good. I have a couple other side comments that I'll make later on in the process.
I'll just comment on something you said. So anyone may disagree with my report or what's in here. The findings are a direct result of the information that was discussed in the interview process. So I'm not that I wouldn't entertain bringing those up, but I appreciate you just noting that because certainly everyone has kind of perspective there.
Before I launch into some other comments, I just wanted to comment about the 360. So in this last board self-assessment, I gave us a rating of poor, I believe. I can't remember the rating anymore. And I said that I thought that we were not getting the feedback that we needed from other stakeholders about Dr. Brenner. And I think as a member of the Superintendent's Evaluation Committee, this time and other times, I've often felt that we needed a broader look at what people are feeling. And I had learned of a survey called the Vital Network Survey that the district already is doing. And I don't know much about it, but people have talked to me about it who are in the district. So I'm not sure that a 360, something new, is necessarily needed. I think that there are lots of tools out there that the board has not seen. And so maybe as board president, you might look into the different surveys that are available. I'm just going to take some of Dr. Lund's comments too. My worry about the coach is at what cost to the district in terms, I don't know how much a coach costs, but I will save other comments for later.
I appreciate the information regarding the 360 review. I think while the investigative process is outlined in KACB is done very much in isolation by the board president, my hope is that the recommendations provided are not done in isolation, and that if the board wanted to move forward with a 360-degree evaluation, my hope would that be for something like that would be passed to the Superintendent's Evaluation Committee to determine what that process looked like. But the 360-degree term is essentially to have broader feedback. In relation to a leadership coach, I certainly understand being financially fiscally responsible, but I also think that it provides a good benefit to our district to have some good coaching and leadership. So that, again, would be something that would be brought to the table that my plan is not to do that in isolation.
So some of my other questions were, so the investigator, I think you mentioned at the beginning, the investigator is Laura Cobb, is that correct?
That's incorrect. I was the investigator. Laura Cobb provided legal counsel and provided guidance for the scope of the investigation, but I completed the investigation.
Who interviewed?
I did.
Okay, thank you. And so my general comment is that I wanted to share is this. I also have had a lot of work experience, sitting on this side of the table, and I found this very challenging, to be given a packet at 4:40 when I had, at that time, 6 clients with me in the office, which is why I got here at 5:32. And so I couldn't really look it over, so I appreciate you taking the time to read through it. This, to me, is monumental for several reasons. One, we're talking about the superintendent of the Grand Forks Public Schools, and I had literally little time to look through it. And I'm a very speedy reader. I'm a fast reader. I just worry about making any decisions that quickly about someone of Terry Brenner's stature and his role in the district. I want to make good, sound decisions as a board member, so I feel a little crunched in terms of time pressure. And I just feel like I have to say that.
Can I respond to that?
Yeah.
As outlined in policy KACB, the board president is directed as the investigator and the decision maker if the policy or if the investigation was substantiated or not. So the board's role in that, the board didn't have a role in that. The board is here to make recommendations as a result of my findings and conclusions from the investigation. If you believe that policy should change, then that would be a separate conversation, but that was the process that was outlined. My goal is not to provide a copy of the report an hour before the meeting. In full transparency, I have a big surgery on Thursday, and in addition to that, I just lost my train of thought. That's why I wanted to go through the report at the board table.
Thank you.
Other questions? Go ahead.
I have just a couple footnote comments about it. One of them is regarding policy KACB. I do think that I think I like the policy. I think it's critical that any employee has the ability to raise issues in whatever district, organization, whatever, and I think that's critical. I don't think that should be changed. I think there needs to be transparency. I do wonder a little bit about the investigation of a superintendent or business manager by the president. So I think that it's not for now, but down the road, there should be some conversations about that. When you look at all the investigations that are going around the United States right now with all university presidents and athletic directors and football coaches and all that, they're all handled by independent outside people. They're not handled by internal people. Plus, I think, having been the president a few times, this is an enormous burden on one individual. Although it does state in here that they can retain an attorney or a consultant to assist. But anyway, so one footnote is I think down the road we should have a discussion about this policy. The other footnote I have is my expressed disappointment. It was in mid-April that I got a communication from a newspaper asking about, did I get a letter from a group complaining about the superintendent? And clearly, somebody leaked information. I don't know who it is. I don't really care who it is who did it. But I mean, this is the kind of investigation that should be done. There's a time for transparency and there's not a time for transparency. And at the beginning, it's not a time for transparency because I think there were probably 8 out of 9 board members who had no clue as to what the person was asking us about. One probably did because she had gotten the letter. And so I'm disappointed that it was leaked out. Again, transparency is fine, but it should have occurred now, not back then. I thought the leak must have been very unprofessional. I'm really saddened that kind of happened. So that was my 2 footnotes. Thank you.
Go ahead.
I just have some questions as we go through the document, just a little bit. I'll skip that one. The first one is number 14 on page 8. Well, I printed it, so I don't know what it is. 14. Throughout the budget realignment process, some principals asked if the 15% general fund balance goal had to be completed by 2026, that statement. Dr. Brenner responded, not at this time. What does that mean?
Means exactly what?
Well, I
was
guess I
written.
need clarification. Does it mean that he said it doesn't have to be completed by 2026, or it does?
It does. And just as a general reference, like, I think it's okay to ask some questions, but if I do say, like, if I respond in a way that maybe is not satisfactory, it's all of the investigative documents will be placed with HR, including my notes. So those could be reviewed at a later time.
Oh, I'm just curious as to,
Yeah.
maybe it gets down to me being an English major in terms of what Dr. Brenner responded not at this time.
Yeah.
I just, I'll try to, so the next one is a clarifying question, number 5, on page 11, under February 22nd events. So Dr. Brenner was not part of the Zoom question period at the end, it's my understanding. Principals only stayed, and he left the Zoom, is that correct?
The meetings were at the building level, so.
Many principals stayed after the conclusion of the Zoom meeting. Oh, they were present.
In the building.
Ah, okay, thanks. I also feel that on number 5, page 13, with regards to the foreign languages and the music lessons, whether that was too late in the process for Dr. Brenner. I mean, I guess that's more of a comment. I would say that if there were conversations with music faculty at the high school, for example, those teachers would have known that there were one-on-one lessons within Fargo, West Fargo, Bismarck, and Minot. So that kind of, for me, gets back to the whole process of not reaching out to stakeholders through this. And I understand that Dr. Brenner wanted to save those conversations, but if those conversations had been held earlier in the process, there would have been more information, I'm sure, from those teachers about music lessons in other districts.
Sure. I would maybe just caution you, Cynthia, that it's probably not a time for what-if scenarios, and that was indicated that was a universally supported process, not to reach out to staff members. Yep. Go ahead.
The 6 recommendations, is the GFPA and Dr. Brenner privy to those? And are they accepting of those?
GFPA and Dr. Brenner were given a copy of my investigation. I did not ask them if they were accepting of the recommendations. As the policy is outlined, I would bring forth the recommendations to the school board, and the school board would take action on the recommendations. I did ask some questions during the interview about possible recommendations, if that helps. Go ahead.
How do you ensure number 6?
We have a policy at the school district related to retaliation that outlines the process to report any retaliation. So I don't know that we could, be at every building or every conversation to ensure that that doesn't happen, but it was stated multiple times throughout the investigative process. In each person's interview, it was stated, and the retaliation policy was read, and a copy of the report that was given to GFPA and Dr. Brenner has that written in there. Other comments or questions? The board action tonight would be to take action on the recommendations only, not my findings or conclusions. So with that being said, there could be a motion made to accept the recommendation as is. Recommendations, there could be recommendations to amend or change or add anything, or there could be recommendations to not accept it, or a motion to not accept it. So those are the choices that we have for action at tonight's meeting. Go ahead, Dr. Lund.
Well, I'll go back to a leadership coach. I mean, it's clear there's trust issues that are on both sides, and that it's going to take both sides to work on improving the trust relationship. So that's the only reason I bring up I think a leadership coach is a great suggestion. I think you're right. We should look at this as an opportunity to improve not one individual, but lots of individuals. So I think, Cynthia, in answer to your question, I think it's money well worth spent having a leadership coach. I just wonder if we don't want to have, rather than just arbitrarily picking somebody, if we want to just make sure, okay, are the groups that are involved in this, are they okay with that person or that group or something like that? And I don't know how to reword it any other way, but that's my only other thought.
GFPA has a leadership team, I believe, comprised of 4 individuals, so that could be an option to designate the leadership group of GFPA and Dr. Brenner and myself as.
And most leadership coaches are acceptable to almost everybody. I mean, most leadership coaches do a very good job. I'm just wondering if they can have some thought into the process.
Josh, did you have anything? Bill? Joel?
First of all, sorry for my tardiness. With regard to number 2 on the 360, since we already have the Superintendent Evaluation Committee, I think that should be punted there. Otherwise, we're going to have 2 responsibilities to do the evaluation. I mean, they're separate functions. One is from top down and the other is 360. But I still think we should probably put them together. So maybe if we could consider editing number 2 to say that would be part of the Superintendent Evaluation Committee responsibility. The other part is, in terms of a cadence, is that an every year thing? Do we want to do that this year and every year thereafter? I don't think that happens in a lot of businesses, that it's an every year thing. It's maybe an every 3, every contract renewal, every 5, as warranted by. So I think that would be another piece to put on the Superintendent Committee, rather than do that here today.
Could we say the superintendent shall have a 360 evaluation from this point forward as determined by the Superintendent Evaluation Committee?
Sure. I think to put it there would be a good place.
Did you have something else?
I agree with Dr. Lund about the coach. It's important to pick a coach that fits. Not all coaches fit. All of them want the work, but not all of them fit and do the right job. So I think that that's important to do that. I wouldn't want too many cooks in the kitchen on that, Amber. So I would say if it's you, and between you and our vice president, that would probably be enough for my likings. Then the only other part, and Dr. Lund alluded to it, was visiting each school at least 2 times per year. If that's already happening, I mean, that's part of a job description to be engaged in it, but I don't know that we want to make that exactly part of that. But if it's not happening, then maybe that is where it would belong, is in a job description versus this, so.
The superintendent's job description does not specifically outline that, but it is outlined as a responsibility in the North Dakota Century Code as a superintendent duty.
Okay.
I think my thought behind that was feedback received from the investigation and tracking that in a better way.
That could be part of the 360 evaluation and reported on that. That makes sense. I like it. Thank you. That's all.
Go ahead.
If that's actually in century code, we probably should change our CAABR to put that in there. I mean, it can stay in this document, but we probably should, if it's in century code, it should probably be in our policy.
I think there's probably a couple notes for future consideration for policy that might not fly here, but for consideration. So I had a request to change number 2 to say the superintendent shall have a 360 evaluation from this point forward, comma, as determined by the superintendent evaluation committee. So if there was a motion to accept as written, it would just need to be with that amendment as well. Go ahead, Josh.
Can I just ask a question as to a prior comment made by Jeff regarding just the acceptance on both sides on recommendations being made, to the complaint, respectfully urge you to address these concerns and work to implement positive changes that enhance transparency, communication, respect, collaboration, and feedback. Do you feel that in your investigation, along with any other conversation you've had regarding your recommendations, that we're setting the right foot forward to enhance that communication and improve upon?
Yes. Monty, did you have any comments?
Thanks, Amber. I would say I appreciate all of the time that this has taken, and I appreciate the ability to join via phone. I think in regards to the 360 evaluation, I think we can reach out to North Dakota School Board Association for assistance on that. And I do think that placing the drive of the 360 evaluation within the superintendent evaluation committee is a good spot to place that. And I do think, I know I've been on that evaluation committee with Josh. I know we've talked about initiating the 360 evaluation, and I think it's a great recommendation, and I think it's time to put that in place. Thank you.
Thank you. If there's no other comments, I'd seek a motion for approval of the recommendations with the amendment. Go ahead.
Is the motion you're seeking, I should say, does the motion you're seeking also have any amendment to number 3? We've had some conversation about chosen by the school board president, mutually agreed upon. Is there any language that someone wants to suggest before we move forward? We've talked around it, but I don't think we've gotten there. I think maybe Mr. Larson was the closest.
Less is more. I think if we keep it at president or president and vice president level, that's all I would want. I mean, certainly Dr. Brenner has to, to the extent he's willing to work with an executive coach type person, it's got to be a fit. Because it isn't always, so I would want to make sure we get the right person in place without involvement from the Principals Association.
Again, I think this will go on public statement that, I think that this process could be one in which naturally you'd want both parties to agree that the fit is okay. And by both parties, I don't mean every single principal that might be designated as the leadership team of that organization and Dr. Brenner. So I could add at the end as mutually agreed upon by the complainant and respondent, if you'd like. If not, then you trust that I would just do that. And Dr. Lynn?
I would suggest we just change it to school board president and vice president.
Okay.
I think if I would hope people will continue to have common sense in that if you two pick a coach and it isn't working, that Dr. Brenner or Mr. Bohan or somebody will step up and say,
Yeah.
we don't think this is a fit.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't think we can write every scenario in some of these recommendations. I would trust you two, and then we'll go from there. And if it isn't a fit, then somebody needs to know, and then we pick a different one.
So number 3 would add by the school board president and vice president.
I'll make that motion with those 2 amendments.
So there's a motion to approve the recommendations regarding the investigation with an amendment to number 2 as determined by the Superintendent Evaluation Committee, and number 3 to add and vice president. Is there a second? Second by Bill. Any further discussion? Go ahead.
Well, I feel like I've been kissing my sister for the last 66 minutes. It's one of the, it's just a difficult situation. I think it's an important situation, and I hope we move forward from this in a positive manner to make things better for everybody involved. Because it isn't affecting just the principals and the superintendent. It's affecting lots of employees. So I think now is the time. We should try and move forward in a positive manner, and hopefully we'll have positive outcomes with these recommendations that you've outlined.
Go ahead.
I just want to add one thing to that. It's affecting students as well. When you think about 84, I might have that number wrong, but you indicated 80-plus students coming here. That means we had 80 students in turmoil. And I know one in particular who met with me and I believe everybody, and he spent a lot of time studying our guiding change document and the mission of the school, and so he was not alone. And so I do think we need to remember to keep students in mind as well.
Okay. We'll take a roll call vote, please.
Larson? Yes. Lund?
Yes.
Berger?
Yes.
Gockler?
Yes.
Manley?
Yes.
Shab? Yes. Palmasino? Anderson?
Yes.
Flynn?
Yes.
Unanimous with all 9 board members voting yes.
Motion carries. On that note, I'll just end us out in response to what you both just said. This was a very difficult process. It was difficult in a lot of ways. Conflict is not fun. It can cause damage sometimes. It's not fun for Dr. Brenner to have to sit up here and listen to all these things about him. It's not fun for the principals to sit in the audience and have to talk about the things that they don't agree with. It's not fun for the board to sit here and talk about disagreement and conflict either. I've reflected a lot through this process, and when we educate students, it is under the guise of growing and learning. And there's a way forward out of this. I truly believe that. I think businesses and organizations go through a cycle shift and change every so years. And sometimes we just need a light to provide us with an opportunity for more growth and more education. And I think in this instance, this highlights a very public example of how to work together in a better way, how to resolve conflict in a healthier manner. And it shouldn't fall, it should fall on all of us to provide that example as a learning opportunity for those that we educate. So I'm proud of this board and the process in which people felt comfortable coming forward. And I hope that we can provide an opportunity to amend and build some bridges and to move past this. I'm also grateful for this board that you took time out of your off Monday to come and talk about these hard things. But we can do hard things, and we can move past this in a healthy way, in a collaborative way, in a way that creates more trust with all parties involved, and I'm confident that that can happen. So thank you to all of you, and we are adjourned.